Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Item 1 is the notification of the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee. At its meeting on the 16th of May, Council appointed Councillor Lorna Dupre as Chair of Environment and Green Investment Committee and Councillor Nick Gay as Vice Chair of the committee for the municipal year 2023 to 2024.
Thank you very much indeed, Dawn. And I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to this meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee at Newshire Hall. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to both Councillor MacDonald as a new member to this committee and to Frank Jordan, our new Executive Director for Place and Sustainability. We have a heavy agenda for today, unusually for this committee, and there is a special meeting for some members of this committee at 2 p.m. So I would therefore ask members to keep both question and comment as succinct as possible. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that the meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. The closest fire escape is through the middle doors on my left. So item 2 is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Bradnam. We've got Councillor Slatter substituting. Apologies from Councillor Ferguson. We have Councillor Sanderson substituting, and apologies from Councillor Tierney.
Thank you very much indeed. And does anybody wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Emma and Frank.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that I'm not an elected member, but for the interests of transparency, I would like to declare that I'm a director of Light Blue Fibre on behalf of Cambridgeshire County Council for agenda item 13. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Similarly, in relation to item 13, the paper references my job title as shareholder director, so I'd like to declare similar interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, both of you. Item 3 then is the public minutes of the Environment and Green Investment Committee meetings held on the 16th and 22nd of March 2023 and the action log. So we're being asked to approve the minutes of the public meeting on the 16th and the public meeting on the 22nd of March 2023 as an accurate record. If any committee member wishes to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, could they please do so now? I'm not seeing any objections, so I'll take that as carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And we have an action log included in the published papers for this meeting. Do officers have any updates on the action log? Emma.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to minute number 98, the draft interim corporate tree and woodlands strategy, the comments say about a workshop being arranged in June 2023. That actually is being organised for September 2023, and hopefully more details will be available shortly on that.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. That's appreciated. Are there any questions on the action log, or can we take that as noted? Thank you very much indeed. That is noted. Petitions and public questions? I'm not aware that we have any. No, we don't. So item 5 is decarbonisation of council buildings, and Sarah Wilkinson, Carbon and Energy Manager, is sitting in the presenter's seat ready to present us this report. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you, everybody, and good morning. Under our low carbon heating programme, to date we have replaced fossil fuel heating systems with air source heat pumps at 22 of our sites, with projects at another 6 sites currently underway. However, in order to reduce our Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions to net zero and meet the target in our climate change and environment strategy, we will also need to decarbonise the remaining 33 buildings that are still using gas or oil. Since this paper was...
Could I just ask you to be closer to the microphone?
Yes.
Some of us are having trouble, I think,
Slightly.
following. Thank you.
Okay, is that better? Okay, can you hear me? Since this paper was published, we have heard back from Salix that unfortunately our low carbon skills fund application that I mentioned in paragraph 2.6 was unsuccessful. However, it was announced yesterday that a further round of public sector decarbonisation scheme grants, which is the larger fund and is for capital works, will be opening in the autumn as expected. So we'll make sure we look to put an application into that one. This grant, if successful, could contribute a significant portion of the costs to future projects. However, council funding would still be needed for the balance of the project costs, which would come from our existing decarbonisation fund. So the purpose of this paper today is to request to update the criteria for investment from the council's decarbonisation fund, specifically to allow the possibility of also including energy efficiency measures such as LED lighting or improved insulation, and renewable electricity generation measures like rooftop solar PV, alongside the core purpose, which is low carbon heating systems. This change will have the advantage of reducing overall heat demand and or reducing electricity consumption, helping to make business cases more viable in many cases, reducing our energy bills, and also better aligning with the whole building approach advocated by Salix for grant applications. I'm therefore recommending that we update the investment criteria as set out in paragraph 2.16 of your paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Members, do you have any questions for Sarah on her report? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Sarah, for a very comprehensive report. Under Appendix B, under Appendix B, we have Great Gidding School, which states it's under construction. I'm assuming that that is now not the case, as the authority has decided to close that particular school. Can you tell me whether we'll be getting any money back from the works already carried out, or whether that is lost funds due to the scheme only being half completed before the school closed?
If it's okay, I'd like to pass that question to my colleague, Chris Parkin.
Thank you. You're quite correct that the Great Gidding project is not completed. At the moment, there's a negotiation ongoing between property and the landlord for Great Gidding School about the handback of the site. And a decision will be taken as part of that process about whether to proceed with the air source heat pump installation. You're quite right that there's a potential to regain some money that hasn't been spent in completing the works from the funding package provided to the school. But on the other side, we'd have to repay the grant funding which was provided for that project, whereas if we complete and hand the site back with decarbonised heating, we don't have to repay that grant funding. So there's a balance to be struck. At first glance, the recoverable funding is smaller than the amount we'd have to repay in grant funding.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just as a supplementary to that then, if we go ahead with the scheme and it is all the works are completed, will the County Council be looking to recoup some of that money from the landlord?
I think that's probably part of the negotiations of the handback of the site, so I don't have an answer for you. Yeah, can't really comment at the moment, but we can report back as those negotiations progress.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Paragraph 1.4 refers to funding package for a programme of low carbon heating projects on maintained schools. Would this investment also be available for academy schools?
No is the short answer. This programme is just for council's own buildings. There's two different parts of the funding pot of the decarbonisation fund. The one that I'm talking about today, which is for the council's own buildings. And for context, I've just mentioned that we also have put some of the fund to projects at maintained schools, and that the purpose of mentioning that is just for context of the overall budget pot available. The bit I'm actually talking about is just on our own buildings and not schools at all.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from members? No. Debate. Oh, Councillor Hathorn.
Maybe this is an item for debate, actually. Shall I continue? But there was one thing is, I think this is such a good scheme. My parish council, one of my parish councils, is currently sort of debating how they go about doing this, and it ends up being a lot of conversation. But I think it's so inspiring. It would be wonderful if parish councils could have, a seminar or an online workshop just to sort of, have an hour or whatever, seeing how the council has done this. I think this seems like a very sensible idea. It seems, I support the proposals here. And the other thing is, these government, I can't remember, I was speaking to Councillor Dupre, and I think it was this scheme where the council applied for the funding and they were too late because you had to apply immediately to get it, which seems to be the case with everything. And I don't know if there's a mechanism, but I would very much like to see the committee writing a letter to the government just saying, this just seems such an absurd way of trying to get funding.
I think that's a fair point. It's no way to run a chip shop, is it? But Cheryl, are you in a position to comment on the bidding mechanisms?
So I think just going back to the Low Carbon Skills Fund, which is the one that Sarah reported, that's the one where it seems to be very quickly oversubscribed, and we haven't been successful in the last 2 years, despite getting our application within 10 minutes onto the system. So it just shows the latent demand for wanting support for decarbonisation of buildings. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which is the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, which is what Sarah and Chris have both been talking about, where you get capital funding towards projects. We have been successful. But I think we know that this is coming forward in September, or we assume it's coming forward. We don't know how that's going to move in further years. One of the conversations that came through on the MP Chris Skidmore report, which was the net zero policy document earlier this year, was just this issue around competition for funding, and whether we should be looking, or whether government will be looking at how to consolidate funding pots potentially, so that you haven't got this continuous competitive bidding process for some key strands of work. Now, they didn't include public sector decarbonisation scheme funding, which is what Sarah's talking about in this. It was more around the wider funding and competition for retrofitting, either sort of retrofitting homes for some of our social housing, or retrofitting our homes which were, let's say, very inefficient, or looking at how you can encourage the able to pay market. So those are some of the funding pots that they're looking to try and see if they can consolidate. And there are discussions potentially around how that comes forward in future, let's say, either devolution deals or in future framework agreements between local and central government. So does that help? Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. I mean, I think we can all agree that our officers are very expert now in negotiating all these various funding pots and funding streams, but it could be a lot simpler, I think, and a lot easier for everyone. Are there any other debate or question points around this item, or are members happy to move to the vote? Not seeing anybody else, so can I see those in favour of the recommendations, please? That appears to me to be unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members. Our next item is item 6, which is heat pump ready project Friday Bridge, Fenland. So Chris Parkin is still in place from the previous item. So Chris, please could you present your report?
Thank you very much. So Heat Pump Ready is a Department for Energy Security and Net Zero Innovation Programme, and it aims to develop ways to overcome barriers to the installation of domestic heat pumps. And that is in order to help achieve the national target to install 600,000 heat pumps per annum to support the transition to net zero. The County Council is a member of a consortium that's been successful in securing up to £1.8 million of innovation grant funding to develop, demonstrate and evaluate a council-backed, web-based one-stop shop, possibly combined with affordable loans and definitely combined with hyper-local marketing to make domestic air source heat pump installations accessible to more residents. The demonstration project split into 2 phases, phases 2A and 2B. 2A runs until November this year, and that will be developing the one-stop shop, marketing it to residents, conducting home surveys, providing installation designs and quotations to residents, and exploring the demand for and feasibility of affordable loans at no cost or risk to the council. That survey and installation offer will be free to residents, and there is no cost to the council at phase 2A either. The costs are fully met by the grant from central government and funding from City Science, who are leading the consortium. At the end of the phase 2A stage, so in November, there will be a project review and we'll report back to committee at that stage on the outcomes. So that will include assessing resident demand for heat pump installation, the findings from the surveys in terms of costs of installation, and examining whether there is a demand for low-cost loans and the feasible way of delivering them. So at that stage, we'll seek a committee decision on whether to proceed to phase 2B, which is the installation of heat pumps at residents' homes. That would take place in June to December of next year. One of the aims that central government has for the programme is to gather experience of what they call high density deployment of heat pumps. So they are looking for us to achieve at least 25% uptake within one substation area. And that is their sort of criteria for releasing the funding of £5,000 per home for the installation work at phase 2B. The Friday Bridge area in Fenland was selected as a suitable area for this trial based on the potential to address fuel poverty, the fact that the area is on the gas grid, which is one of central government's requirements for the scheme, and the fact that substations are not too large, so don't have too many homes and are manageable to work with. And also from a review with UK Power Networks, we didn't identify any major grid constraints in that area that might hold up installation work. The report that committee is considering today seeks approval for the procurement of contractors for the survey of homes, installation design work, and next year installation of domestic air source heat pumps if November committee makes a decision to go ahead with the installation work. We need to do all of that procurement now because we need the installer on hand to be able to generate the quotations to residents that are part of the phase 2A element of the works. And the procurement requires committee approval because the value of the procurement will be in excess of £500,000 given the cost of installation work. The procurement exercise, we've already run the invitation to tender, and it's been run as a mini competition under the council, the Cambridgeshire County Council shared framework for domestic energy efficiency works, but award is awaiting committee approval. The framework contractors have all been subject to rigorous vetting on quality and financial standing, and we will have direct management of the contractors that are appointed. So if they underperform, we're able to both monitor that apply penalties and ultimately terminate the contract if the contractors are not delivering. However, they have, as I say, been subject to a rigorous vetting under the framework procurement. They're all required to be accredited to the government's Trustmark scheme. They're all required to be accredited to the microgeneration certification scheme for heat pump installation and to the British standards past 2030 standard for domestic energy efficiency retrofit. They've also, I can tell you that the 2 contractors under consideration have Trustpilot ratings of, I think, 4.7 and 4.9, just adding a little bit of confidence on their track record. I think that's everything I have by way of introduction. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. Does anybody have a question for Chris on this paper? I thought it was admirably clear. Councillor Corney.
Not so much of a question, but just more of a, obviously, I welcome that the last part of the report, because obviously with what we've gone through with Solar Together, I think that's really important that this is policed maybe and every check possible we can go through now.
This is a very different setup to that, and I'm hoping we can have more confidence in that. I'm sure we can. Councillor Hathorn.
Right. I guess, look, so it strikes me the real challenge here is getting the 25%. That, and I guess that's like the biggest selling whatever job compared to the percentage I can see of we are seeing people transferring and retrofitting across the country. I take it that's all in the plan, and how does that work? How do you persuade those people to do it?
You're absolutely right. It's a very demanding target. And this is an innovation project. There is definitely a risk that we might not achieve that target. There is some discussion in the report about how we might go forward if we didn't hit the target, but nevertheless there was an appetite from committee in November to proceed. So there are options to go ahead even if we don't get the 25% target. I think in terms of how we're going to try and achieve that target, that's where the kind of hyper-local marketing comes in. So the marketing's being done as well as the kind of website. There will be door-to-door marketing and community engagement events that are being run by a local organisation, Peterborough Environment City Trust, who have a lot of experience in working with the area. And the offer of the free survey and installation design, we're aiming to try and get at least 60% uptake for that, in order to then give us a reasonable number of a reasonable allowance for dropouts after that. But you're absolutely right, it's a challenging target and we all acknowledge that.
Indeed. Councillor Ray.
It's a good scheme. Is there a limit on the capacity of the substations? And can that be achieved for the 25% uptake you require?
I guess the strictly correct answer to that is always yes, every substation has a limit. We've specifically worked with UK Power Networks prior to the start of phase 2A to identify Friday Bridge as an area that's less constrained in terms of substation capacity than other areas.
And additionally, you say that it's chosen as an area of fuel poverty. Air source heat pumps with the current price of electricity generally cost more to run than the equivalent gas boiler. Is that going to help your 25% uptake?
I think targeting an area which has a relatively high index of deprivation does make it more challenging to achieve the 25% uptake. Heat pumps, running costs are complex. They're broadly speaking around on parity with a gas boiler on average. Part of the design work and the proposals that are given to residents will set out the projected running costs to enable residents to take an informed decision. So we definitely won't be trying to force heat pumps onto people if they're not going to be affordable in terms of running costs. There is also work from government to, or a commitment from government to work on rebalancing gas and electricity costs, and a relatively small shift of costs from electricity towards gas would actually tip heat pumps into being cheaper to run in almost all cases.
Long term, it's a good.
Well, absolutely. I mean, government's commitment is to have made significant progress in doing that by the end of next year, which is an interesting time period to be doing it, but that's what they've said. That might actually, if they publish plans before summer next year, that might actually work quite well with the installation timescales that are being looked at on this project.
And finally, most companies actually don't charge domestic customers for surveys and estimates. I can see that the scheme here is paying for that. I hope that the subsequent installation costs will reflect that from the contractors.
Yes, absolutely. The costs will be charged separately for the survey and for the installation work. Surveys, I guess it's really the design work that's the expensive part of the survey and design process, because you do need to do a proper thermal loss assessment on the building, assess the capacity of the heat emitters to be able to keep the building warm when operating at the lower flow temperature that you'll have with a heat pump. And that's where things can go wrong if it's not done properly. That's why we hear horror stories about heat pumps not working well in some instances, because the installation's not been designed properly. And that can sometimes involve more than one contractor to do the survey and design work. But absolutely, yes, that cost will be funded from the grant funding and from City Science, and then the installer won't be paid twice for doing that work. That's not going to happen.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak on this? Not seeing anyone. I mean, I think this is a genuinely interesting project, bringing together a lot of different players to try to ease that customer journey through the process and make it easier for people, as well as more affordable by bringing in the government grants, but also the potential of more affordable. Thank you very much. Yes, so, and we've looked at different potential locations for this, and Friday Bridge has that kind of mix of properties, population, infrastructure to make this something that could run, but it's very much, as Councillor Hathorn, you said, it's very much in the communication and how that is done. And I'm really pleased that we've got Peterborough Environment City Trust on board to be doing that part of the process, as well as the other partners that we have in this. So can I see those in favour of the recommendation here, please? Thank you very much. Again, I think that's unanimous. So thank you very much indeed, Chris. Very interesting report. And so we move on now to item 7, which is local energy system transitions. So I will ask Cheryl French, Assistant Director, Climate Change and Energy Services, to introduce this item. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. So just before going into local area energy planning, I thought I'd just quickly describe to you, to get it into your minds, what it is we're trying to get to in the future. You know, what is a smart local energy system? What does it comprise? What does it look like? So this is when we have energy generation. So this could be micro renewables like solar on your roof. It could be a solar farm. It could be a wind farm. It could even be excess solar in the summer, making clean hydrogen. And so it's what you do to generate locally your renewable energy or your renewable electricity. It's also about what we can do to store some of the excess renewable energy that we might generate at the peak of summer, for example, with solar, or we might generate at a peak time when you've got wind, or we might be needing to put a volume of electricity into a thing, which is like a battery, so that when you have demand, when there isn't renewables around, that you can then draw from that supply to be able to support the wider energy system. So it's also including batteries, and batteries can be large or they can be small. So you can have them in your home. And I know some people around here might even have one already, storing their solar from their roofs. So what you've got is you've got generation and you've got storage. We also want to link something called interseasonal storage. So this is where you want to store large volumes of electricity. And what that could look like is how you have big bodies of water that you can then heat. And then when you need to take that heat out to then redistribute through electricity, you then take that out of that system and put it back into the energy or distribution network. It's also about demand management. So this is about, are we all putting our kettle on at the same time at 7 o'clock in the morning, and saying, if we designed our whole energy system around when we all come together and behave in the same way, you end up with infrastructure which is redundant because you're designing to a peak. So what you're trying to do is also say, how do we manage demand through the whole system so that we don't have to design the electricity system or energy system at a scale that is redundant for a lot of the time, but only comes in at those peak points. And so demand management is key. And as individuals, as consumers, and as businesses, we are part of that process. So then the third part of that is we're all moving from having gas and oil boilers to electrified, so air source heat pumps, as Chris has just talked about. And so that's moving heating from fossil fuels onto the electricity system. So you're increasing some demand. The same for some transportation. So our EV cars and how those connect into the electricity system. Those are other demand points. So we also have in the future with climate, we've got a higher demand for cooling coming through. And in some countries, there isn't heat demand, it's cooling demand. And we will be getting there at some stage with the impacts of climate change. So when you put all of these little points together, that is a very complex system you're trying to build. And key to that, and I'm looking at Jaron here, is that we're going to have good digital platforms that allow and manage that demand and supply performance across the whole system so we can be as energy efficient as possible. And a key part of that whole system is that unless individuals are engaged in that system, you don't get the energy efficiency and you don't get the benefits in the whole system. So the move to a local smart energy system is about how do we as active citizens all participate, but also benefit. And the benefit comes through, how do you save money on your bills? How do you plan your demand? How do you get generation on your roofs or batteries to be part of that system? How do you sell excess electricity from your home to your next door neighbor? How does the business that's down the road with solar PV on their roof, how do they sell the electricity when they're off for two weeks during the summer? How does a school sell their electricity when they're not in for the 6 weeks? So that is the future we're trying to get to, is a future where if you've got excess renewable energy, you can put into the system, you can then get it shifted to someone who's wanting to demand it. And it's not just wasted. So we're trying to move from a system in the early noughties, which was at a 90% inefficiency, to greater efficiency of over 90% efficiency. And the only way that occurs is through local and individual engagement in that process. So I just wanted to paint that picture before going further. So we all know that's not where we are right now. And if we are going to reach the government's ambitions, which is to get a power system at 2035, which is net zero electricity system, there's a lot of change to come. And if we want to get to net zero by 2050, even more change to come on the wider system, which includes transport and heating. So this is unprecedented shift that we're looking for. Equally important in this is we've just gone through an energy crisis. And so it's sharpened our minds around how we need to accelerate away from fossil fuels dependent on the global market to clean energy provision and what we can do in a more sustainable local way. And so that energy security issue and resilience is very important for our economy. And so without that cost-effective or resilience, local resilience, you don't have an economy that can thrive and compete as well as it could do. So those are the preconditions for getting into, well, what are we going to do now? So we've already been seeing energy system change over the last 10 years. Lots of things have been happening. We've been moving from a centralized model to a decentralized model. And so that's from a national model to a local model. And what that's introducing is that we in local governments and in local communities and in local businesses are now needing to engage in that process. It's how do we become part of the planning and design of that system? And how do we help and support the delivery of that system? So government has paid across the country for 4 local area energy plans to be developed. So you've got one in Peterborough, you've got one in Greater Manchester, and you've got one in Wales. I can't remember where the other one is. I've just lost it in my head. But those local area energy plans were developed to try and identify how do you design a system locally that takes you from where you are now to whatever your ambition is on net zero. And what does that look like in terms of cost and infrastructure change? And who are the actors and stakeholders that need to deliver across that system? So I put in Appendix C, Peterborough City Council's headline figures. And as you can see, what comes out of it is quite large figures. And so what we have to do is plan and optimize what the costs are going to look like across the system, who's going to pay the costs, and how we're going to get those costs together, and how do we start initiating and supporting the supply chain to get there. So what happened last November is the local authorities across Cambridgeshire, plus the CPCA, plus UK Power Networks and the universities got together to say, well, let's try and understand what this looks like. Let's look at what was done before and say, is that what we want, or do we want something different? And how do we plan this so that we get a 5-year costed plan ahead of us on how we need to start shifting our local energy system, but with the longer term goals of what do we need to put in place strategically with UK Power Networks, with National Grid, to be able to ensure obstacles like grid connections don't hold us back. And so that is the main thrust of what we're trying to do with the local area energy plan. So we've set out in section 2.6 to 2.8 just some of the objectives and the scope, and we'd really like to get input on whether you think those are the things, those are the important things that we've captured, and to also identify that we're trying to do this as a partnership, Cambridgeshire County Council leading that process, but with our local authority partners. Local planning authorities are essential in this process, as are the CPA. One partly for strategic infrastructure investment, the other for land use planning, so that we can all collectively plan how we're going to get there. And so we're one of the first to go through our committee process to talk about the local area energy plan and the process, which is an 18-month process, and our partners will be hopefully taking their reports through over the next 2 or 3 months to also build that participation and understanding of the importance of this work. That's it. Sorry, that was a long introduction. Sorry. But I thought it was important to describe that. So I'd just like to put forward the recommendations, which is to make comments and to identify that when we're wanting to go forward, once we've secured support and commitment, we would like to procure energy expertise, and this is specialist expertise in modelling, to be able to progress some of that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Cheryl. Members, do you have any questions for Cheryl on her report? Councillors Milnes, Ray, Sanderson. To start
very briefly, because I know we're limited for time, but I'm delighted to see that we're in the vanguard of this process, and I look forward to the development of the another LAEP acronym that I've got to make sure I don't confuse. I think from a personal perspective, I'd be delighted if we would take reference to the development in South Wales at Park Erin, because that is an example of a local energy plan providing battery storage, renewable energy, selling back and from the grid. And it's exactly the sort of development that we're looking to achieve across the county. So best of luck with that, Cheryl. I'm delighted to hear us in the vanguard, and look forward to seeing it develop.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Milnes. Councillor Ray. No? Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the report, Cheryl. It's very comprehensive. So I was interested in what you were saying about the County Council's partners in this process, so other local authorities. But will there be other partnership working on this project? And how can we ensure that the energy needs of all our partners are included? And secondly, companies that have large draws on the grid, will we be looking for inward investment from them as part of this? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Yes, so as to sit alongside the process, there's a technical process which is about just what is the total demand that we're going to have in the future, and then what do we need in terms of infrastructure types to support that. But actually, we need the input of all stakeholders. So we're developing a stakeholder plan, which is who are those big users, like Anglian Water as an example. So pumping water around Cambridgeshire has about 20% of our energy needs. Looking at what are the communities involved, looking at the specialist landowners, looking at other expert and energy companies to understand what the skills are going to be and the skills deficits, so that we do get a plan which is practical and which serves the purposes of the demands that some of our businesses are going to want to have. So the stakeholder plan will be one of the first things that we do. So that was the first point. Your second point, I think, was about whether these large companies will contribute. So obviously large, and is that in the plan making process or in the investment overall in terms of the infrastructure? And I'm making a presumption it was the second part. Yeah. So obviously, if demand increases and they want more from the grid or from the distribution network, there is a cost associated with that. So everybody pays towards the cost of the infrastructure that we have. So we as householders pay on our bills for the infrastructure. If you're developing and wanting greater demand, or you wanted to put generation on there, you pay to do that as well. So everybody will pay for this new system that we're moving into. The issue is who's also going to benefit out of that. And the important part is that we want communities to be key in benefiting from it and playing their part in that system. Does that answer your question?
That's very helpful. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Chair.
Frank would like to come.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So another clear benefit of having a local area energy plan in place, it gives you a very clear evidence base to inform bidding rounds, conversations with central government, but also informs inward investment opportunities from the private sector, both from businesses who use power, but also those that supply power. So it will provide a very, very clear evidence base for us being able to demonstrate the need, in what will be a competitive process with other places. So being ahead of the curve will help us with that regard as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Frank. That's a helpful observation. Before I move to the debate, just on the recommendations, as Cheryl has said, the first one is to comment particularly on paragraphs 2.6 to 2.8, which outline the outcomes and scope of the local area energy planning process. The second one is to delegate or responsibility for awarding and executing contracts. I think my understanding is that we delegate authority rather than responsibility, and therefore if I am right, and I believe I am, then I would like to suggest that alteration to the recommendation, please, so that it reads delegate authority for awarding and executing contracts. Are members happy with that alteration of that one word? Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to debate the matters in the report and the recommendations? Councillor Gardner.
Well, thank you, Chair. Well, really, it's a question again from Cheryl, following on from what you've said, is under 2.7, we've got engaging communities and putting them at the heart of the plan. How will communities, can you expand on how communities will be able to be, how they will be engaged with and how they can get their views across to the plan? And then if they've got a scheme they would like to do, how would that then be able to come forward?
So at the moment, we actually have a lot of communities approaching us wanting to do something not dissimilar to Swaffham Prior, as you can imagine. And so it's not that we haven't got communities waiting to want to do something. The big challenge is about what can they do and what and where and how can they invest and how do we support that investment requirement. So if what we're trying to get to is something which is either having, let's say, local generation, which could be a wind turbine or a solar farm, or it could be something like Swaffham Prior, depending on where you are, there's a significant amount of work and technical work that needs to go into that. And so you will inevitably always need to do some form of analysis of what is the heat demand, what is the electricity demand, what does the village do in the future, is there going to be any change? So there's a lot of technical support that's required for a village to be able to actually even identify what's the best thing to do. So the issue of packaging up what that support looks like is something that we're looking at currently. So in the team, Ethna, who's come forward as the head of energy services, has a community energy background and has worked on community energy projects on putting the business cases together and seeking and generating funding to be able to support that. So the first thing is we already have communities demanding. But there are some communities that aren't demanding yet, but might need some more help. So we'll have to put in measures to work with those communities that need more help getting onto the first stage. Some of the other mechanisms will be tools that we use, like local energy planning into neighbourhoods. So how do you plan with your community what you think is required to build acceptance? It's also working with, for example, energy companies where you want to say they might want to make an investment in a large piece of infrastructure, but your community could benefit by either reduced tariffs or community funds that come into your community to help perhaps retrofit homes, which some people might not be able to afford right now. So what we are trying to do is develop holistic packages for communities to get them to net zero. So there's the engagement bit. How do we get to those people or communities that aren't wanting to engage yet? It's what are the tools we can provide and the offer in terms of technical support. And it's where and how do we set up the funding mechanisms that can support, for example, crowdfunding platforms. So there's a lot of work that's required to support that process.
Thank you. We agreed our community energy policy in March, and we're hoping to bring a community energy strategy in the not too distant future to this committee. And Councillor Sanderson's committee recently approved a series of pilot decentralisation projects, one of which was around decentralisation of energy in East Cambridgeshire, and ideas there for community energy. And East Cambridgeshire has an active East Cambridgeshire Climate Action Network group, which is interested in promoting dialogue around these kind of issues. So that's a useful community resource there to draw on in developing that pilot there as well. So there are, as Cheryl has said, there are a number of different things that we are doing very energetically to promote community engagement and involvement in community energy schemes across Cambridgeshire, which I'm delighted to see happening. Councillor Coots.
Just a clarification, really, as I understand it then, Cheryl, this provides the bedrock, the background. It doesn't provide something which has those lovely, exciting photo opportunities and all the, you know, the things we're all longing to do. But without this, the rest of it wouldn't work.
Yes, I mean, as Frank mentioned earlier, it's the evidence base, and then identifying from that evidence base what's required, and then trying to see which parts you can get the community to be engaged with to benefit. Yeah, not a good photo opportunity on a plan.
Thank you for that, Councillor Coots. Councillor Slatter.
Yes, we need the photos of happy people looking at their bills, don't we? That sort of stuff. When I did the carbon literacy, I made a pledge to do something that I've still not been able to do because it meant trying to change something with the local housing association. Now, we've got housing associations around the county responsible for old and new housing, great big blocks. It ticks boxes for them. So I do hope we have a package that they can just steal from us. And I'd like to be able to sell your intellectual property, but let's be realistic. They're not necessarily looking at this as a priority. They just leave their tenants to get on with it, and their leaseholders similarly. So I do hope that we can help social housing managers to do better in that holistic approach. They've got some of the communication networks already in place. If we can, if not already doing it, probably, let's make the most of it.
I was just going to say, you know, when we look at the example of Swaffham Prior, where about 50 homes in the village were owned by 2 social housing providers, we've engaged with them. They want to participate in the scheme, and tenants have to come forward to say when and how they want to switch from oil onto our system. But what we agreed was to put in all the infrastructure. So when they changed either tenancies, that the new heat system would be put in, or if they voluntarily moved forward. So we have had engagement on that, but you're right, as we move forward, it probably needs to be a bigger level and strength of engagement.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other speakers on this. So sorry, Councillor Gay.
Just very quickly, I think the Swaffham Prior project, we used about 10 million of Public Works Loans Board money at a time when the fixed interest rate on those loans was very low, about 2.5%. The interest rate has now gone up to 5.2% the last time I looked on PWLB, and this distorts the economics of the projects like Swaffham Prior very considerably, because it means the amount of revenue that needs to be generated in the future is much higher. So that is an extreme problem, I think, and also a thoroughgoing commitment for funding from central government is absolutely essential if we're going to be able to roll these projects out at scale, which is what we need to be doing in the next 5 years.
I mean, you're right. There was obviously government support for the projects at Swaffham Prior for the heat network, so a £3 million grant. And importantly, they also provided development grant funding, because without development grant, it's very difficult for communities to move forward because of that detailed analysis. I think the issue of the cost of loans right now is a problem, but at the moment, you've also got the high cost of electricity, which is the counterfactual part on that. I think as you move forward, we're going to have to find the routes for getting development funding, the routes in governments to access the grants that can support this. And that does take quite a lot of administrative time to be able to put those packages together.
Indeed. Okay, members, then we've commented on the draft outcomes and scope of the process, and we're asked to delegate authority, taking that one-word amendment alteration, for awarding and executing contracts for the provision of specialist energy consultancy services. So can I see members in favour of the recommendations, please? Again, I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, and thank you, Cheryl. Moving on then, we have item 8, which is the Anglian Water Cambridge Wastewater Treatment Plant Relocation Project. And we have with us David Carford, who is our project manager working on this, to present the report. So I'll give David a moment to settle himself at the microphone, and then there you go.
Thank you. So yes, this paper today is presenting what's known as relevant representations, which is in response to Anglian Water's application to the Planning Inspectorate for the relocation of their wastewater treatment works. The relevant reps is the first opportunity to respond to the application, and as such then there is a due process to go through, which is explained in the appendices 1 and 2. It is seeking development consent order, and therefore that's why it's going through the Planning Inspectorate, and ultimately it will be determined by the Secretary of State, in this case Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. As a local authority, we are classed as a host authority alongside South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge City Council. We are a party just as anyone else that chooses to register in the process. We do have a couple of particular things that we as a local authority do. The first is adequacy of consultation, which has already been done. And the second, during the examination, will be to submit a local impact report. The local impact report will very much expand on the points that we're raising in this draft of the relevant representations, which is really providing the key issues as we see them, and providing that information to the Planning Inspectorate, and in time the inspector or inspectors that will be involved in this, giving them the key matters that we consider should be considered and discussed at examination. The examination itself is a 6-month process. It's a fixed time duration. And it is for the Planning Inspectorate to determine when that is to commence. Early indications are we're looking at the autumn, so September onwards period, but there's no commitment at this moment in time, and we'll wait to see that. Just as background that's also included in the paper, the relevant reps is open to individuals and organisations to submit to the Planning Inspectorate as well as ourselves, and that period opened on the 14th of June, and the deadline is next week, the 19th of July. The Anglian Water proposal is in 3 main parts, really. They're relocating the wastewater treatment works that are currently at Cowley Road in Cambridge, and they're relocating to just north of junction 34 of the A14, which is between the villages of Fenditton and Horningsea. The site itself obviously has all the processing for cleaning the water. there is going to be a pipe that has an outfall into the River Cam. Further elements are there's a pipeline that will be going from Waterbeach down to the new site or the existing site, and then there is also the decommissioning of the existing site as well. The relocation allows the further development on the existing site for housing, and is part of the ambition of the North East Cambridge development to deliver some 8,000 homes in that area. So there is a relationship there. The new facility has benefits of being a low carbon facility. It's also producing or capturing gas that's able to be added to the national grid. So there are benefits that Anglian Water are promoting in having a new facility. There have been 3 consultations to date in public, and Cambridgeshire County Council responded to all 3 of those, and that has developed what is now the application that was submitted. As per PIN's guidance, we have already got delegated authority to manage being able to meet tight deadlines within the development consent order process. Some of those deadlines can be as short as 2 weeks, so we have to be very reactive at times to best inform the process as it goes forward. In this instance today, obviously fortunately the deadline for submission neatly fell so that we're able to take it to committee, and we will continue to always take it to committee when we have the opportunity. And equally, the guidance from the planning inspectorate is to always engage with the applicant and continue to discuss with them to bring about as best proposals as possible, and we are doing that. Technical officers are engaged with Anglian Water, and we're having helpful discussions, and we will continue to do that to seek clarifications, but equally as details arise, that may, as well as address some matters, it may raise new ones as well. And therefore, delegated authority again is important in that respect, so we can be responsive to the information that's become available to us. Moving forward onto the main issues, obviously, Appendix 3 has our draft relevant representations, which has been drafted by our technical experts, and succinctly goes through the major chapters within the application, particularly around the environmental statement. And there are an array of matters being raised. And we have highlighted in the paper some of the main issues that relate to ensuring matters like biodiversity are properly met. We do have some concerns, but these may be able to be resolved through the examination process and in discussions with the applicants as well. So again, the issues within the relevant reps are really highlighting the key issues to the inspectors for them to then consider if to include in the examination and to go forward from there. I think I'll draw breath there and allow any questions firstly, I think, because that was a long introduction. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, David. That's very helpful. Does anybody have any questions for David on the report? Start with Councillor Coutts.
Maybe just a twitch on my part. I noticed at 4.2 you're asking for sight of unredacted versions of the biodiversity and ecology surveys. Does that imply you've been offered redacted ones, or is that just a precaution?
So the whole application is available publicly on the Planning Inspectorate's website, and obviously for various very sensitive and good reasons that they do have redacted versions. So what we're asking to do with Anglian Water is that they could share those confidentially, so that our experts are able to properly assess those concerns.
Thank you for that. It's just something in me twitches when I see somebody offering redacted information. When they're offering redacted versions of information, you always think, what are they trying to hide here?
I think there are good reasons for hiding the locations of sensitive species of this, that, or the other from members of the public, because most of us are incredibly responsible, but some are less so. Councillor Slatter was next.
Yes, in contrast to that, I know I'm coming as a substitute, and you've probably been all around it and had briefings, but this should be available. It is available for the public. It should be helping the public. There are no maps, and I wonder why. Therefore, you cannot read sensibly your comments about cycleways and so on if we don't know where they are. So please, could we have a simple location map in the same document, please, and not expect people to rummage about through the planning portal, just even to get a vague idea of what's being suggested. I really think this should always have a map to tell you what they're talking about, please. Sorry, it's a geography teacher coming out in me.
Oh no, not geography teachers, that takes me back. Councillor Sanderson was next, and then Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, Appendix 3, I think it is, Section 4, developer not sharing biodiversity information. I think this is, well, if you can answer it, that would be good, but I just wonder if we'd be content to endorse that recommendation, excuse me, given the environmental concerns. And the other question I have is Section 4.5 of the main report. Stakeholders, does that definition include local people from the villages, for example, and environmental groups as well? Thank you.
Yes, on 4.5, they're mentioning proposing an advisory group, and we would look to have local input to that. And as I say, it says in here, we just want to develop more detail with Anglian Water about their proposals around having an advisory group, so that obviously the mitigations they're bringing forward are appropriate and have got stakeholder engagement in that process. So we will hopefully develop that with Anglian Water.
Thank you, David. Councillor Sanderson, could I ask for clarification as to what you were trying to get us to do regarding the biodiversity? I mean, Councillor Coutts made the comment that about the redacted and unredacted versions, and we are seeking unredacted versions. Unredacted versions, not the ones that are redacted on the public record. Was there anything in particular you wanted us to do about the biodiversity information?
Well, it was just really a question of clarification, so I think it's probably been answered, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just seeking reassurance. Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. It was more an observation than a question. I think, the officer team done a good job in, posing the appropriate questions, very wide ranging from human health questions, biodiversity, agriculture and soils, access around that area, what it's going to mean for traffic. So, I think the team have done a good job as we go through this process, and thanks for all their work on this. It's, they're posing many of the questions that residents in that area would be asking. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is very much a team under pressure with all of the applications that are coming in that we have to oversee. So the work of the team is hugely appreciated, I know. Before I move on to debate, however, I believe we have Councillor Daunton as a local member who wishes to say something to us via Zoom. Is Councillor Daunton available? Welcome, Councillor Daunton. So would you like to say what you have to say to us, please?
Yes,
Thank you,
Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for allowing me to speak today. My division of Fulbourn borders on that of Waterbeach, which is actually named by officers in the heading of their paper for the location of the proposed water treatment plant. Communities in my division directly affected by the proposed move include Quay, Fenton East and Teversham, as well as neighbouring villages of the Wilbrahams. And there continues to be much local concern in both these divisions, Waterbeach and Fulbourn, over the proposed move. And members of the committee will be aware of representations made at previous stages of the consultation process by the Save Honey Hill group and parish councils. My particular concern today is to comment on the paper as prepared by officers, both the paper and the detailed Appendix 3. And I draw attention to 4 aspects: biodiversity, carbon capture, decontamination and access. The applicant has accepted the need to comply with the county and district council's requirement for 20% biodiversity gain, and the paper sets out this council's specific concerns that there is a lack of detail in the DCR application, and officers are right to press for more details and access to relevant documentation, as you, as members of this meeting, have already picked up. For example, a copy of the biodiversity net gain spreadsheet and associated maps is needed so that the biodiversity net gain assessment can be fully reviewed. We've been told all along that this is a plant for the 21st century, and we need to be reassured on the point of biodiversity, which is a key principle of the council. On carbon capture, one of the issues that's been brought up time and again by residents is a concern that the new plant will not take full advantage of modern methods of carbon capture and achieve net zero. Officers draw attention to this in section 5 of your Appendix 3. Can I urge the committee to support officers in pressing the applicant on operational emissions and on emissions after 30 years, figures for which are not given? The document refers in several places to decommissioning arrangements, both in respect of emissions, health of the local community, particularly the traveller community, the impact of the ventilation stack which is to be installed on the existing site, the decommissioning process and the decontamination of the existing site. Officers make it clear that there are a number of questions to be answered and further clarity required. Again, these are points of considerable concern to local communities. Highways and transport issues are key responsibilities of the County Council. These and related access issues have been raised at stages 2 and 3 of the consultation process. Local members, both district and county, were disappointed that the proposal for a new direct access route from the A14 was not supported. In the absence of this, and given the already busy junction 34 of the A14, that will be the route to the site, it's absolutely crucial that access during and after construction is carefully managed and controlled from the outset. And we must start by ensuring control of vehicle movements when the access route itself is being constructed, and ensure that there are no blockages of the relevant A14 slip road or any knock-on effect of this on the B1047, a key artery for the villages most impacted by the construction of the site. The construction timetable, including vehicle movements, must be tracked and monitored, and their impact on local communities and habitats taken into account very regularly. Maps and tables have been drawn up to assist with the monitoring, and it's important that the county is able to have full assurance that the applicant is fulfilling its stated aims and obligations at all stages. In respect of the A14 junction and access to the construction site, additional lighting will be needed. Assessment of the impact of lighting on surrounding areas should be included in the comments. Residents have also drawn attention to the impact of construction traffic on the current busy cycle route, particularly access to the local schools and into the city. This route is soon to be upgraded to a greenway, thus taking more cycle traffic. In general, more should be done to deal with the adverse effects on local communities, including for walkers, cyclists and equestrians. And officers are correct to draw attention to this in section 9.2 of the paper. Whilst the addition or opening up of additional walking and cycling paths is welcome, these will bring recreational visitors to the area, and there needs to be parking provision for them to prevent parking on highway verges. I would urge adding this to the comments. I accept that we're dealing here with the planning process. However, I believe it's important we also recognise that there is an intrinsic link to the deliverability of all the elements of the scheme, and officers will be aware of the need to create hooks by which the detailed elements of the application can be linked to deliverability. Thank you.
Much indeed, Councillor Daunton. It's always useful and important to have the local member perspective. Can I just check with the with Dawn? Is this the only local member representation that we're receiving today? It is. Thank you very much indeed. I noticed that David was making copious notes. Was there anything you felt you wished to respond to out of what Councillor Daunton has said, David?
Yes, and thank you, Councillor, for backing the points that have been with our officers have made in quite a short space of time. So thank you. Just on the lighting matter, that is something that I mentioned earlier. We're having ongoing discussions with Anglian Water to engage with them as soon as possible. And we already have had a meeting where we've discussed the lighting, both in terms of or around biodiversity and its impacts around that. So we're already engaging with Anglian Water, being helpful in arranging meetings. So we're in dialogue around matters like lighting that you raised. Yeah, that was just what I wanted to highlight.
Thank you very much indeed, David. Councillor Daunton, just to say that, as you rightly observed, we are dealing with a planning process here, and there are limits around that as to what we can, what it is appropriate to say at various stages. However, the recommendation is to delegate authority to the Executive Director in consultation with myself and Councillor Gay to make minor changes to the relevant representations, and I'm sure we'll be looking at what it is possible and appropriate to include by way of note of member views here today, in addition to the technical responses that we've got in this report. So thank you very much indeed. I'm just about to come to Councillor Gay, who was next to speak.
Yes, just very briefly, from those of us that actually live in Fen Ditton, there is a very vigorous campaign group that expects to be represented by council during the examination, and the parish council also is very proactive in addressing this issue. Indeed, they circulated a detailed list of concerns to the village yesterday, but it does need to be emphasised that the influence that the county council has on this process is rather limited, and I think that should be emphasised.
Indeed, thank you very much. That's a very important point to make. Does anybody else have any comments they wish to make on the relevant representations as proposed to us? If not, are we happy to endorse the representations and to delegate authority to Frank in consultation with myself and Councillor Gay to make any minor changes before they're submitted? Can I see those in favour of those recommendations, please? Once again, that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, and thank you, Councillor Daunton. Item 9 then is the corporate performance report, and I believe we have Tom King with us, Senior Research Analyst, to present the report. So thank you, David. If David can vacate the hot seat and let Tom take his place. So Tom, are you settled and ready to introduce this?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair, and good morning. So this report supports the committee in its performance management role. It contains contextual information to support members in a strategic overview of work towards the committee's priorities. And this particular report covers the period of Q4 for the 22-23 financial year up to the end of March 2023, where data was available at the time of reporting, and all of the data is available in the associated appendix to this report. It provides an update on the current status of the development of selected key performance indicators, which track the performance of the services the committee oversees. These KPI outlines were agreed at committee in September 2022, and officers have been working on their development since. As part of the continual development work, Service Directorate management teams have been continually reviewing the KPI list to ensure that they remain relevant, reliable, clear, fit for purpose, and are balanced. This work has led to a proposal, which is noted within the report, to remove one KPI from the list, indicator 25, the percentage of take-up of new fibre broadband services delivered by the Connecting Cambridgeshire Superfast Broadband Rollout Programme. As noted in the report, the contract related to this KPI has now been closed, and so it won't be updated. And to add a new comparable KPI, a proposed indicator 24B, the percentage of premises in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough with access to gigabit capable broadband provide information about the more recently delivered service. This indicator aligns both with national government's focus and the Connecting Cambridgeshire digital connectivity strategy, which notes that the ambition is to exceed the national target for this access of 85% access by 2025. I'd just like to note what we mean by access within this indicator. It indicates availability of the service for to individual premises. Individual service upgrades for each premise are not automatic, and residents must take action to see an improvement to their service, which then impacts on the take-up figure. Finally,